So you've been wondering what that equalizer plugin does in Ableton? Well, you're not the only one. But today, we'll uncover the mystery of the equalizer plugin in Ableton Live. Hi, I'm Craig. Welcome to the Push Patterns channel. Before we get started, let's get into the nitty gritty, get a little bit of theory done, and find out what EQ really is. EQ, or equalization, is used to balance different frequencies within a sound. EQ is also a super important part of the mixing process. When you mix, you have to ensure all the instruments are balanced with each other and no frequencies are treading on each other's toes. So with EQ, we can carve out space for all the instruments to live. So yeah, EQ is a super useful tool when it comes to producing and mixing. So in this video today, we're going to look at two main types of EQing, which is additive and subtractive. As you can probably guess from the title, additive is where we look at boosting certain frequencies along the frequency spectrum. And subtractive is where we look at taking some of those frequencies away, and we'll look at why you would do one over the other. Now, the type of EQ plugin we're going to be looking at today is a parametric EQ. Parametric EQ allows you to boost or cut frequencies along the spectrum very precisely. That's why it's one of the most popular types of EQ used within music production. So let's jump into Ableton now and have a look at this EQ and get accustomed with all the features it has. Okay, so now we're in Ableton. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our browser window. If that's not already open, use this little drop down menu here. Audio effects, EQ and filters, and EQ8. And then simply drag it onto an audio channel you wish to use. Now I'm going to put it before the compressor. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Okay, so this is our EQ8 plugin. There are 3 different filters or shapes that select the range of frequencies that we're going to either adjust up or down along the frequency spectrum. So in Ableton's EQ, we have 8 filter points. That means along these 8 points, we can choose one of those filters to either boost or cut along the frequency spectrum. So let's go to filter point 1 and click the drop down menu to see all these filter points. So if you notice already, you're like, you said there was only 3, there's more than 3. So these are variations of the main 3. So we have something called a low cut, and we have the opposite of that, which is a high cut. So we have a low shelf and a high shelf. So we have like the opposite within the high frequencies, we have it in the low frequencies as well. Then we have a bell point. Ableton has an extra one here that you don't normally see on other EQs, which is a notch EQ, which will just kind of take out an EQ and you can lift it up and down to get a finer point. Which essentially you can do the same with a bell EQ. Ableton has just been extra and put an extra filter in there to help us get there quite quickly, but essentially it is a version of the bell. So once we've chosen our filter type, we can then move along the frequency spectrum wherever we want. Then we can either boost it up or boost it down. Now, if you notice here, this is quite a small area I'm boosting. If we go down to this dial here, this is what we call the Q point. Let's think of the Q as the bandwidth. So this is the area that we're going to boost. We can either boost or cut a small area or a large area. So the higher the Q, the more narrower the bandwidth. The lower the Q, the higher the bandwidth. So you see here, I'm boosting quite a lot of frequencies. Or if I pull it down, I'm cutting quite a lot of frequencies here. And you can see as I move this number around in Ableton's EQ, you can see these dials here are moving around, so you can do that. That's quite good if you get an area that you really like to boost and you can just move it up and down without adjusting the frequency. Also, we can do the frequency along here and the Q point. Okay, so that's a bell point. Let's have a look at what the other ones do. So here's a low shelf. So this is a shelf EQ. You see it boosts or attenuates quite a large area. It almost does what it says, it shelves off. See, it almost looks like a shelf, you know? Then the bell point we've already seen. The notch, so it's kind of like a bell point, but it's already taking it out. It's a subtractive way of EQing, and it's there straight away. High shelf, so it's just the opposite of the low shelf. High cut. Now we'll turn down the Q point, and you see with the Q point on cuts, it kind of it has a peak before it cuts off. And this is the same for a low cut as well. Okay. And then we have a ×4, which is just a steeper cutoff on the low and high cuts. Okay, so I'm going to turn that Q down, go down here. We can activate these cue points by pressing this button here, which turns them off and on. As a default, Ableton only has 4 selected. We can go and turn on all 8 like this. So now let's look at using these filters in practice or in context. Okay, so before we get going, we need to think about how we're actually going to make EQ choices. The main instruments we use are our ears, decent headphones or decent speakers so we can hear all the frequencies, and the EQ plugin. We need all of those. If we don't have one of those, we might not make sound choices. Okay. As a little kind of cool little drop down here, where we can open up the frequency a lot wider here. Put some sound words up on the screen that help us identify where certain noises or sounds live along this frequency spectrum, so we can identify them by just hearing and not get caught up in too much of the mathematics of, oh, that sounds about 1 kilohertz. You know, we can hear if it sounds harsh. Okay, we can hear if is there a rumble? Does it sound boomy? Does it sound boxy? Does it sound a bit too brittle, or does it sound a bit too dull? When we can identify those sounds ourselves with our ears, with our headphones, we can then jump in and attenuate the frequency spectrum. So for some helpful tips on the areas that you would like to either boost or cut along the frequency spectrum for different instruments, click in the description below. There is a link to a PDF where I've included something called an EQ cheat sheet. So what that is going to be a picture of frequency spectrums with the name of the instrument at the top. Then there will be sound words dotted along the frequency spectrum, so you can see, depending on what instrument, what areas you'd like to attenuate to either clean up the sound or enhance the sound. So this is a very good resource and it will help you on your EQ journey. So now let's jump in and have a look at EQing some of these instruments that we'll have in this session here. So I have a drum kit, so I'm just going to press play on these drums. And press this button here to open it up. Now the first thing I do is there is some rumble in here. Now you can see down here we have quite a lot of information right up to 20. Remember, from 20 hertz down we can't really hear that. It doesn't mean, okay, if we can't hear it we should just leave it there. Basically means like if we put that on more like bigger speakers that can handle those frequencies, it's going to make the speakers move more. Okay, so by cutting out some of the sub that we can't hear but we can feel, we can tighten up the low end. Now obviously this is genre dependent, and what we'll do is we'll have a look at electronic example in this video as well. So we'll see like in a more of like a future pop trap sort of beat, we will keep in more of that sub because it is part of the genre. This kind of genre we don't really need as much sub. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it to the extreme and then bring it back in when it feels natural. So this is just, this isn't a rule, this is just a tool. Cheesy catchphrase, but it just helps. It helps you hear when enough bass has been cut out. Okay, so let's try. So obviously that sounds terrible. And then the important thing, turn it off and on. Now, if you're listening with good headphones, you'll be able to hear that has tightened up the low end. I also like to reference cooking in this. So basically, think about when you're cooking something and you use salt and pepper. As we go through the different stages of cooking, we don't chuck in a cup of salt, a cup of pepper. That would ruin the overall dish or cake or whatever you're making. We're going to use little bits at a time. So I often reference in salt and pepper. So that's what I mean by that. Sometimes I say it and people are like, what are you talking about? So it's a little bit will go a long way because we're trying to think about the accumulation of all the tracks. So we've got rid of some of the junk there. Then we're going to try it with the highs as well. So obviously do it to the extreme. Too much makes it sound too dull. Okay, let's turn that off. Yeah, sounds cool. Okay, so now let's use the bell curve to kind of see if there's any kind of unwanted frequencies we want. So this is something you can overdo quite quickly. So I wouldn't suggest doing this loads, But what we're going to do is we're going to click number 3, go down here, put the Q, and then we're going to boost it up and see if there's any frequencies that feed back. So they'll scream. And they are resonant frequencies that when we start applying like compression and stuff like that, they're going to not sound very nice. So we can cut them out now. So remember, we're subtracting first. So there's one, so we can cut that out. We can bring the gain down. So there's one, so we can bring it down. So we go down to number 3. There we go. Turn the EQ off and on. I'm going to bring back in some of those highs, actually. I missed them. Okay, it sounded cool. So now let's have a look at that with a bass guitar. So to get rid of this, we toggle down. So what I'm going to do with the bass guitar is I'm going to do it in context with the drums. So I'm going to have the drums playing in the background. Okay, so I'm going to press play, EQ8. Same thing. Go to cut. Not sure if you can hear that, immediately tightened it up. Top. Okay, number 3, here's number 3. I'm gonna put a cue point and try to get a bit of that mud out of there. Okay, that sounds cool. Now let's jump onto the guitar. Same thing, let's do it in context. Straight in there with the low cut to the extreme. High cut. Maybe boost. Maybe dampen down the mids a little bit. So the first stage we look at usually is subtracting. We usually do this before we go into the compressor. So the compressor is not going to be reacting to those frequencies we don't want. We cut them away, compress it, get it all the peaks nice and even. Then what we'll do is we'll look at some additive EQ. So with subtractive EQ, what we tend to do is we tend to have a look at doing more precise cuts. You see here we've got low cuts and high cuts. Now with additive EQ, we use more broader strokes. So we can use another EQ. Rather than use EQ8, we can use the channel EQ in Ableton. Now let me go back to the drums and put this on. So I just click drums here, channel EQ. And it looks like this. Now you can see we still have the same frequency spectrum, but we don't have 8 filter points. We don't even have the chance to change them really. We've only got a low, we can turn the low cut on. But if I click here and type 2, it does shelves. So I'm just going to put 2 on each, because also when you go into a compressor, it also attenuates the peaks of a track. It can make the sound duller. So we can add additive EQ after the compressor, and it's going to just make it, you know, it's almost like your final Instagram filter, you know. So let's hear that off and then bring it on, just with the drums. See how it kind of gives it a final polish. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press Command C and do that on each channel. Then on master channel, I'm going to put an EQ8 as well. Similar sort of thing. Click here. Cut some lows out. F it below 20. just like that. So you could go in a bit more detail if you wanted to, but I'm just cutting out the rumble and the real high frequencies, and then channel EQ after the compressor. Again, this time I'm just going to do 1 and 1. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, we're going to look at EQing another song now, which mostly uses electronic instruments, okay? As it's in a different genre, it's kind of trap. Because this genre has quite a lot of low frequencies, we might not have to cut as much out of it. If we cut too much, it could affect the style of the tune. So that's another interesting point. The genre affects the EQ choices we make as well. So let's jump into Ableton here. Let's hear the drums. First thing I would do is I want to turn down those hi-hats. Also, the snare is quite raging, so I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to find that snare. There it is. Just going to turn that down a little bit. Here we go. We can do that. Here, I'm going to turn that down -15. That's better. Okay, so I'm going to do it on a group level. Okay, so I'm going to go EQ8 and drag that onto the group. Then I'm going to put it before the compressor. Open up the detailed view. Low cut first. It's too much. Turn it off and on. I think I can cut more of that. Okay. Also, can you see here, this is quite a busy area. There's quite a lot of high frequencies. So I'm going to try cutting some. That immediately feels a bit nicer. I'm going to get this bell point here. Also going to bring it up to this sort of area here. Make sure 3 is selected. Tighten up the Q. Bring it to the extreme. See how that kind of evens out the hi-hats a little bit. Also, we have like kind of a dip in kind of volume here, so we could maybe look at getting our other bell point here. Bit too much, maybe a little bit like that. Let's add one more in, number 5. Maybe a little bit of the mud here we could maybe get rid of. Okay, let's turn it off and on. Again, salt and pepper, we've just improved it a little bit, okay. Now let's look at the piano, so let's bring that in. Let's do this in context, okay. So EQ8 again. Now already, let me bring up the detail view here. Look how much junk is down here. We don't need that for the piano. That's not enhancing the overall timbre. So let's again do it to the extreme. Do it as extreme as that. Let's have a look at. Sounds fine. Okay, now additive EQ. So let's go channel EQ. Add the compressor on. So we're gonna go 1, 1. Same with drums. Compressor on. Channel EQ. 1, 1. Okay, I hope you found this video helpful. This is one in a series of videos where we'll be looking at sound fundamentals. If you haven't already checked out the compression video, check that out, where I do a similar sort of thing with the two same examples I used in this. We'll go through the theory of compression, some schools of thought, and then also we'll apply it to some examples. Any questions on this, don't forget to ask down in the comments, I will get back to you. If you found this stuff helpful, we're releasing a lot more content on this channel, so don't forget to like and subscribe.